Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Future in Review podcast. I'm Berit Anderson, the COO of Future in Review. And for those of you who have never heard of Future in Review before, we run the annual FIRE conference, which The Economist has called the best technology conference in the world. The other arm of our business, Strategic News Service, provides its subscribers with the most accurate source of information about the future of technology and the global economy. And I'm here today with Evan Anderson, who is, in addition to being my brother, a senior analyst with Future in Review. Our dinner conversations are indeed entertaining, as you might guess, with a whole family working in a media company focused on the future of technology and the global economy. But Evan's specialty specifically lies with fighting nation-state sponsored intellectual property theft. He is an expert on the Chinese Communist Party and the CEO of INVNT IP, which is our initiative focused on fighting nation-state sponsored intellectual property theft. We're going to talk today a little bit about a series that he has been working on for a while now. Turns out that with his background, he is thinking a lot about Taiwan these days, as many who watch the moves of the Chinese Communist Party are. And he has just published last week the third in a 4-part series about how to deter an invasion of Taiwan, what the United States can do, and what are the kind of industries and systems that we need to shore up in order to make sure that we are resilient to any kind of incursion by the CCP. Is that accurate, Evan?
Yep, that's pretty accurate.
Okay. All right, great. So we're talking specifically this week about manufacturing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, just kind of like the bigger picture dynamics here. So in your piece, you write about credible deterrence when it comes to Taiwan. Can you explain for those who may or not be as versed in global conflict terminology, what does that mean?
Yeah, so there are 2 parts to it, right? So deterrence is what people talk about all the time, and what we're really talking about these days is the U.S. and really a large number of allies, which is a good thing in the world. There should always, I think, be large groups of countries that are working to keep the peace. And that's definitely what's happening here. So we've seen all these, major threats from the CCP about invasion, et cetera. I know it's been on a lot of folks' minds, but obviously we have some ability, and particularly allied with Japan and South Korea, Taiwan itself, Australia, the AUKUS agreement, all these other, consortiums of nations, the EU, a lot of trusted partners together are all working to keep that from happening. And the way that it's traditionally talked about is the kind of the basics, right? So do the combined nations in question have policies and militaries capable of deterring the CCP from launching some sort of full-scale, straight-on invasion? But I think that there's a lot more to it, and so that's kind of where the credible comes in. The ability and potentially things have been kind of changing in the right direction, I would note, by the way. But there have been some advances on the Chinese side when it comes to their actual military power, their hard military power. And so that's part of what has everyone concerned, right? There's been advances in missile technology, et cetera, that we've seen that make people wonder a little bit more each year sometimes if the CCP is developing the capabilities that they are in order to launch a actual kinetic invasion of Taiwan. But in general, there's kind of more to the story, and so that's part of what the series has been about. And the term credible implies all of the things that you might think it would. So in order to deter the CCP from launching an invasion of Taiwan, we do need those things that have been talked about for years that are kind of the traditional military understanding. But as ties very well into INVNT IP's work, you also need the ability to wage a war over time. You need secure supply chains in a number of different industries. And more than any of these things, you need the CCP to be convinced that you have them, right? So you need to A, have them, and B, have them believe that you have them or have the ability to get them. And that's part of where the credibility of your deterrence comes in, because we have to imagine that with all the threats being made from Xi Jinping's government, it is indeed possible that they are thinking about invading Taiwan. And if they are, and if we are to deter them, then they must believe that whatever happens next would not be worth it, right? And so not only are, the size of our military is relevant, but also equally, I would say relevant is our ability to both in the information sphere, right? In our ideologies and our nation's willingness to defend a partner, et cetera, et cetera. And in the economic sphere. So I think the war in Ukraine has been a very good example of this. There is a lot more going on in any conflict, and really always has been, but more than ever today, than just tanks and fuel and bullets. Those are very important and obviously critical on the front line, but there's much more to any particularly international conflict that has to do with your economic ability to sustain what you're doing. Whether you're either side in a conflict, any set of nations, your ability to support each other, to feed your populations, et cetera. So that's really what we've been focusing on, is kind of the overarching various aspects of modern warfare and what we think actually would deter the CCP from doing something rash, and all the different ways in which that comes down to more than just ammunition and basic goods, right?
So when you look at manufacturing in general, how does that fit into, like, what is your operating belief about the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to manufacturing as a deterrent? Is it that if the United States is able to continue to produce X, Y, Z, like, or the allies are able, what is the underlying thesis here about how that would deter an invasion?
Yeah, so this applies very well to INVNT IP's work over the years. One of the reasons I'm saying that is that two of the most important industries when it comes to the global economy, but also when it comes to fighting a war, would be steel and aluminum production. And that's an area that's been really obviously part of a longer story. And so the reason that INVNT IP was even focused on that was, of course, being IP theft focused. We were watching concerted campaigns from the CCP to steal the ability to produce those metals, but
to steal the steel.
Yeah, to steal the processes of the IP related to the production of steel. But then we also watched kind of the broader economic warfare take place over really about the last 15 years, wherein they stole the steel, therefore they didn't have to spend the money on the R&D, right? They stole the IP from companies around the world for how to do that and how to do it efficiently and how to do it, well, 2x quality. There are still quality issues, but we're not going to get into the deep details, because the real point is they then used that to create state-sponsored firms, or to bolster pre-existing state-sponsored firms that took over the entire global market for those things. And that story is over. They really did take over the global market. And today we're in a place, and I wrote much more about this in my piece, but we're in a place where the US has drastically reduced its steel output. So have many of our allies. We still have some sizably productive allies when it comes to steel and aluminum, but it doesn't even compare to what the Chinese produce. And so part of that story is that is exactly what you would want to do if you A, wanted money and wanted to be in control of the global economy, but B, also wanted to undermine the ability of your adversaries to make war. And so one of the things go ahead.
So my question there is, if you're looking at the two countries side by side, China and the United States, historically, the US was a top steel producer, correct?
Yeah, for many years throughout the last century, we were massively, really in a lot of manufacturing, not just steel, but yes, we were a top producer.
And so what would we need to do to get back to that place?
Yeah, and I cover more of this, but
do we have, and I guess, sorry, just before you answer that, is it a supply, like, are we dealing with supply issues that would keep us from renewing our steel manufacturing, or is it a capacity thing, like we just need to expand our production and manufacturing facilities?
It's beyond that, actually. So one of the ways that this worked on China's behalf, obviously they had cheap labor, and to some degree there will always be issues with that in the global economy. Any country that can undercut on cost can essentially remove that industry from another country, because if they can produce at the same quality for lower cost, they will win out.
Globalization.
Yeah, but there's more to the story here. Dumping has occurred at great levels across the planet. It's the same thing has been affecting the EU, by the way. So this is not just an American story. This is a manufacturing of specific and important things outside of China story. And so what we're really facing is an inability to compete on price, not just because of things like low wages, but because of a concerted government effort to over-subsidize an industry, which also leads to a concerted government effort to dump those products on the global market to take out the competition, right? And so it's not a fair competitive environment.
It's not a fair competitive environment. Understand that. Where are we on the supply? Like, could we build that stuff back up if we wanted?
So none of these things, and in fact, many of our allies also have the know-how, right? And we have the know-how. Neither steel nor aluminum are hard to get raw inputs to production for. These aren't, scarce. Iron and bauxite are not scarce resources. They're easy to find in a lot of places. Canada is a great aluminum producer still, although it's also been slipping in its global share. So here's the real answer. One of our key advantages here, and one of the things that I believe we can do to reach a higher level of credible deterrence, is to essentially just say no, because it's really about trade more than it's about anything else. So we've raised tariffs. The EU's raised tariffs. We should raise tariffs higher, on Chinese goods that we know are being illegally dumped into our markets. At some point, that is up to the Trade Department, et cetera. I wouldn't want to even get ahead of them. But I think when you look at the global economy and you look at the implications of losing these industries amongst your allied nations, it's kind of a no-brainer that you should not necessarily let an aggressive entity that is declaring itself to be adversarial to you just remove your industry in the name of free trade that they have never respected with your countries, right? So we actually have the key advantage of having a consortium of nations that can respectfully trade with each other that does not include China, but does include most of the global economy. And those countries really should just be ring fencing the supply chains that they have for really critical goods away from the aggressive adversary so that they would have continuity of supply if there were to be a negative contingency in Taiwan Strait, for instance.
Right. So if what you're saying, I think, is that there is enough demand between the United States and its allies to support a resurgence of the domestic or relatively domestic nearshored steel and aluminum industries.
But only if we have the political will to buy from each other and not from China, right?
Right.
So that is the underlying issue. And they're not the only two industries that I covered in this piece.
Honestly, I understand what you're saying, because the political will thing honestly never works, right? Like, it's the cheapest version. So the only way to do that is to create price fencing that allows for the US steel and aluminum, or regional steel and aluminum, to be cheaper or at cost parity.
Yeah, if you wanted to compete on cost alone, you would just see a continuation of the dynamic we've seen for the last 20 years, which is that a country that's declaring itself to be adversarial to you and all the other countries in your economy and your global economy is just taking the industries right out of your countries. And they don't wind up anywhere else. They wind up in the place with the most subsidies and the most targeted action when it comes to promoting their own domestic industry, right? So at some point, you cannot solve this problem if you don't agree as a community of nations to stop buying the cheap stuff from the person who's trying to take away your industrial capacity by selling it to you cheaply. There is kind of a hard stop there.
Are there, when you think about Taiwan in general, and the potential invasion of Taiwan, there is another scenario that I think is likely, which is, as an information warfare person, which is, rather than a physical invasion, they just basically use information warfare to change hearts and minds enough in Taiwan that their preferred candidate, who they've been courting for the last, several years.
There's always someone, yeah.
Is elected, and then therefore decides to rejoin.
Yeah, I don't worry about that particularly with Taiwan. And that's actually, I think, where some of the concern about something more kinetic comes from. So far, the PRC has been trying to do that, and it's actually been going hard the other direction. So the polling when it comes to whether people want to join mainland China, particularly, I think, after the takeover of Hong Kong, I imagine there were a lot more people in Taiwan that would have considered that a possibility before they saw what was done to Hong Kong. And no one had to really ask too many questions later about what one country, two systems was going to look like, which is the Chinese government's, the mainland
Right.
government's, one liner about what the bright future of Hong Kong looked like. Well, turns out that was all just made up, right? So they very much, I think, in Taiwan have moved past the idea that rejoining would be of use to them in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's not my opinion. That plays out in the polls. And those polls have been getting farther in that direction, right? So opinion polling over the past 10 years in Taiwan is moving farther away each year from any large percentage of the population having any interest in that. So it would take one hell of an information warfare campaign to convince them that they had been, wrong about that. That's a big charm campaign.
I mean, it's like, here's the problem I have with that opinion though. It doesn't take that much, right? Like, we've seen it could take a hacked election, right? I mean, there are lots of
So that's a different question.
Cyber incursions that could be used to simulate or manipulate election outcomes in a way that makes it look like it's a natural transition of power, but it's actually not. And so if I was China, I would probably be more likely to do that because it saves face. It makes it seem like Taiwan wants to rejoin.
Yes, I think any sort of political coup or economic embargo is probably currently more likely than a full-scale kinetic invasion. But those things would probably be paired in any number of different kind of, myriad ways. So I think that there are probably a lot of moving pieces when it comes to the way that the CCP thinks about it. And if one thing doesn't work, then you move to the next thing. So these are all problems that need solutions, right? So not only does Taiwan need to harden its, political system from interference, but it needs to harden its island from invasion, and it also needs to harden its economy from disruption. These are all serious issues, so I agree in theory, at least, that those things are highly relevant.
And in that case, what impact does our manufacturing capability have? Is there any deterrent in that situation to additional U.S. manufacturing? To
a situation in which Taiwan is has some sort of political coup?
Let's say there is no physical invasion. There's some kind of, you're describing it as a coup. I would say like it's equally likely or more likely that it would be some kind of cyber incursion into the voting system or the electoral system combined with misinformation.
In that case, the only way in which manufacturing would be specifically relevant is what is manufactured in Taiwan, which we've covered at great length in SNS and in some other podcasts that you and I have done, which is chips, right? And so in that case, it would be an adept way to try to get control of the island and its economy and chips. And those chips are so important to the global economy that the rest of the world can't afford to let them fall directly into a totalitarian dictator's hands. So more chips, more steel, and more. And yes, and on that level, there has been a lot of effort and a lot of good effort to move some of TSM. It's not to remove TSMC's market share. It's to relocate. It's to partner with them, right? I mean, they're an allied country's company, and so what we ought to do and are doing and ought to do more of is give them whatever they really ask for, because they're the experts in making those chips, and that's a rightfully held top pole position. But I think folks at TSMC are very much aware of that. They're trying to open new manufacturing in Arizona right now as quickly as possible. And we are the U.S. government, and I believe really believe that there should be multiple versions of that kind of project. So that's up to the national governments and TSMC, but if that company wants to diversify, even just for basic reasons, right? I mean, even just for reasons that could relate to climate or natural disaster as much as anything else, having the entire global economy's supply of top chips come from one little island is probably not the best. And it may not even be in the best interests of the company itself that makes them, right? So I think global diversity in manufacturing location is highly relevant there and smart. And there's no reason
Yeah.
that TSMC shouldn't make a killing doing it, right?
Yes. Well, Evan, thank you. If people want to read the rest of your reports, you've covered manufacturing. What have been the other topics?
Raw resources was one of our earlier ones, and then kind of we've talked about a lot of different things. So if you are curious about this, and if you want to know what we've been looking at and which industries we think are the most important to diversify sources for, they are all in the archives of SNS. So if you sign up as a premium member, you'll be able to read
All of them.
all of them.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, and I'll see you back here again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.